Доброго дня, шановні пані та
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The Ukrainian Crisis Media Center continues its work. Thank you for joining us for this event. And our current topic is the Ukraine's candidate status to the EU membership. What does that mean? Our today's speakers are Mr. Kachka, Deputy Minister on Economic Development, and Ms. Ivanna Klympush-Tsintsadze, Chairperson of the Parliamentary Committee on the European Integration of Ukraine. Good afternoon, dear friends. I would like to start with the huge congratulations to the entire Ukrainian people, since we have reached a new stage in our Euro integrational aspirations. And I would like to thank, first of all, to the Ukraine's armed forces, because they keep the civilizational front line, and actually with the huge support of the Ukrainian armed forces, Ukraine is now turning back home, so to say. What preempted that very famous event, this very special event granting the candidate status? This was a huge work of Ukrainian civil society, and a big contribution of all that heroes who, upon whose lives and whose effort we have been capitalizing all that years, beginning with the Revolution of Dignity. And this also may include the hundreds of years of Ukraine's fight and struggle for coming back to its historic home. The most important in this situation, not to waste what we have gained. And despite the skeptical attitude of some European countries which supported this movement under pressure of their societies, and eventually gain the membership and comply with all the requirements. Response to the requirements of Ukrainian society and implementation of the domestic reforms is like a precondition to this candidate status. This is not just a home assignment. It opens for us access to some tools, to some instruments which exist in the EU and which were opened for many candidate countries in the past. We have 7 direct requirements which were drafted by the European Commission and which were written in the decision of the European Council eventually, which had to be fulfilled before we start our negotiations as a with the EU as a candidate. In my opinion, those requirements would not demand too much effort from us, and some of them are rather easy. I mean, eventual call for the appointment, for the contest and appointment of the chairperson and the membership of the constitutional court, and I believe that all the rest of requirements are not that difficult in order to be fulfilled. But here is one detail: the public discussions and broad involvement of civil society in the conditions of war is hampered by natural limitations. But I think in this respect, the COVID restrictions taught us much. We learned much lessons from them, and we will be able to cope with that. I think those people who were disappointed with the preemptive requirements for the candidate status, I disagree with them. I believe that these requirements could be implemented. And the second, I believe that the reforms are bad only for those who pretend they are reformers but not are true reformers. Why? For the general transformation, modernization of Ukraine, those requirements might be very useful because they will allow us to move forward. And in order to implement this or that reforming task, you need sometimes to make pressure upon people who have to do this. So much will depend how much we will preserve our readiness to continue reform, to strengthen reform, despite the martial law active in the country. And I think this will be very much interrelated with the events and the front line. I would like to emphasize that the new agenda or modified agenda for further movement towards the European Union would require more close, more direct, more interactive dialogue between all the stakeholders, between the government, the parliament, businesses, civil society, and I still hope that this need will be successfully satisfied by all the stakeholders. And the second, my opinion is that without involvement of professionals, true professionals, from different branches. This is true about the ministry, the executive, the legislative, the parliament, and with the judiciary, of course, with the without involvement of the European experience of judiciary. This progress towards candidate status would not be successful. And moreover, we have to consider the requirements. We have to consider the commitments that we had made, and Taras maybe comment about business interests and challenges which business faces in today's Ukraine. And despite all that difficulties, we have to create the platform where the European technical regulations and rules and other requirements could be adopted, could be implemented. I do not expect this process to be simple and easy. I still hope that in the parliament we will manage to produce coherent agenda. Although today we're still struggling in Verkhovna Rada, is to put in on the agenda the some laws which have to be voted in today's context, and we cannot put them into the agenda for first and second reading, which is of primarily importance for today. But this only shows that this candidate status is a serious challenge for the parliament and for the internal cooperation between the parliament and other institutions of power in this country. These requirements have to be implemented even at the times of war, in order to have a backbone, in order to have the framework which will serve for our move forward from candidate status to the full-fledged membership. Of course, this will be routine, intensive work, very demanding. It perhaps won't be accompanied by any bright events which would be covered by mass media, but this will be path forward towards the towards the membership, which perspective for which is now legally reflected in the European documents. I believe that the European Union had put the civilizational mark and clearly demonstrated to the barbarians that they will get a strong counteraction, strong withdrawal and repeal, and it demonstrated which countries belong to the European civilization. Thank you, and now the floor passes over to the representatives of the government. Mr. Taras Kachka, I would like to start with the statement with which Ivanna finished. We have to clearly understand that in this decision, which looks simple at the first glance, many senses are present, and under the conditions of war, political decisions should be made very clearly. Actually, in today's situation, we see that there are no more gray zones in Europe, and today in Ukraine there is a very clear border between the civilized Europe and the barbarian machinery, which barbarian country which is looking back into the past. And actually, we had come to a moment when it was necessary to say yes or no, and they were not possible anymore to stay between yes and no. And in this situation, the European countries had to express this clear support. This is political level of support. The practical meaning of the candidate status actually means that we have covered a long path from the revolution of dignity to this moment when we are trying to turn our relations with the European Union into economic, educational, and societal and other integrations with the European Union. Everything that we are doing today is very closely related to the association. When it comes to the visa-free regimes for businesses, for people, for etc. We understand that here we have some limitations. So the potential of the association agreement is rather broad, and for a good example is the energy sector. We had integrated the energy sector commercially and technically, but now we have to finalize that institutionally. This is quite important because for the level of performers, of those who work directly, the relations, this level of institutional cooperation, which foundations for which are laid in the association agreement is quite important. We closely cooperate with the parliament. We work on the industrial visa-free. We work on regime. We work on the customs simplified procedures. We believe that now all that work will become more quick and easier because it falls within the framework of our candidate status. In current situations, if to look at the situation even more practically, currently we have a 30-page document, which is opinion of the European Commission about Ukraine's readiness to the candidate status. And this 30-page document contains some positive assessments that Ukraine starts not from scratch in its candidates movement, and in overall all that assessment reflected in the opinion in some sectors is rather positive for Ukraine. Besides those 7 priorities, top priorities, which became requirements, we have to use the candidates' status more proactively to establish cooperation with the funds of the different funds of the European Union, to promote training for Ukrainians, especially related to the goods, to innovative technologies, services, etc. I think they should become a subject of discussion at the future conference in Lugano, where Ukraine will participate together with the European Commission. On July 13, before that conference, there will be a sitting of the Council on the Association Agreement. The results will be discussed, and with the view that the mechanisms for cooperation should be extended after Lugano. And Commissioner Lysenkiewicz and Ukrainian side had signed an agreement about Ukraine's participation in the live program. This program allows to finance environmental modernization of Ukrainian enterprises. For us, it is quite important that reconstruction of Ukrainian economy should be done on the framework of the European priorities, because we are going towards the European Union. For me, it's obvious that the energy which today exists in the Ukrainian society, we are very much eager to pass through the negotiations with the European Union, not omitting the stages which are needed, but to be very proactive and creative to reach the goal. We observe very closely the negotiations of the Western Balkan countries, and we learn lessons from them. For us, it is a chance to revise, to review from scratch all the drivers of the Ukrainian economy, to reassess them, and to give them new impetus. This is beneficial. This would be beneficial for Ukrainian consumers, and this would be beneficial for the government bureaucrats. We had been developing many governmental initiatives, and now this is the moment when we have to see the results. For example, we had passed all the necessary legislation, but when we started to review it, we found out that we were rather ready for the accession to the EU. On the other hand, there were some aspects which required improvements, and the same way, the same approach will now be applied to all the spheres of our economic life. And Ukraine's accession to the EU, it's not just about legislation. Our Moldavian friends had always been saying that they simply take Romanian legislation and adapt it to their realities, but I do not think that it is as simple as that, because if we try to just borrow and imply something, for example, to farmers, I do not think that this will go smoothly and will help us in our work. we should not be like people who try to apply just academic approach and just implement legislation at the level of academic approach. This is the moment of mobilization for the society. This is a moment. This is actually a call to all the Ukrainians to strengthen transformation of Ukraine, transition of Ukraine, and modernization of Ukraine. Although this is a political decision, to some extent this is a symbolic decision, but it will change much for us in our everyday work. Mr. Oleksandr Sushko, I would like to thank to my colleagues that they had deeply described what has happened. We should have realistic expectations and realistic perspective. The importance of this very moment is that eventually we are united with the European Union as to the objective, as to the goal of our movement. Although in the past we had an agreement as to the tactics, but we had no agreement as to the final goal. And that differences in the vision of eventual perspective negatively influenced the quality of our efforts. Now, when we eventually had reached the unity in setting our goals, it is much easier to decide about the specific agenda, about the pace of movement. Of course, some things will be continued from the previous stage, from the association agreement. The algorithm of accession is not confidential, it is open. Many countries already have this experience of accession, and the European Union clearly showed that Ukraine will follow the same path. On the other hand, the European Union will rethink its institutions and its decision-making mechanisms, and I do not exclude that at the moment when Ukraine will access eventually the European Union, some things will be changed as of that moment. Now we are very much interested that this structure is highly functional, is able to make decisions efficiently and to implement them effectively. So this accumulation of internal moves, external moves, eventually will contribute to the result. It won't be like a immovable target at the horizon. This target, this goal, overall goal, will also change. This is my message. And on this way towards the goal, we expect to see much new, which was not faced by the previous candidates. And that's brings us to conclusion that even without being a member of the European Union, at our candidates' status, we should strive to join to as many European processes as possible. There are such countries as Norway, Iceland, Switzerland, who are not members of the EU. Some of them even are not moving towards the European Union, but nevertheless, they participate rather closely in the processes which are going inside the EU, even not being institutionally the members. I believe that Ukraine should follow this good example in terms of reforming its institutions in the EU direction, in terms of the reforming its sectoral policies. As for my specific visions, my specific vision is dual-fold, so to say. Partially, I have a vision as a member of academic community, and on the other hand, as a multi-year member of civil society working in the advocacy for the European integration. We had been working and raising the issue about membership in the EU for a long period of time. And now, when 90% of Ukrainians support the Ukraine's membership in the EU, and many people now believe that this very moment is important. But it seems to me that many people would not feel it immediately in their everyday lives. And this enthusiasm which we feel today, it won't last long, especially against a background of war and hardships which people experience today. That's why I believe that mass media, public intellectuals should take effort to explain clearly to people and not allow the positive perception of this very moment to devaluate very quickly. While in the past we focused more on external advocacy for Ukraine's membership in the EU, then after this moment we should focus more on our public awareness campaign and support this huge social support of the European aspirations. This 90% aspiration, 90% support of the European aspirations may drop gradually as the routine work will go on. And we have to slow down this process of dropping and prevent the indifference, prevent society from Euroscepticism skepticism, prevent society from non-willingness to do something for the membership. We should not accept that societal support of the EU integration will be automatically at the same level as it is now. We have to work on building up this support among domestic stakeholders. We know quite well that in Ukraine there are a lot of groups of interests who for some businesses for whom it is more profitable that Ukraine is closer to the EU, but not in the EU. I do not think that this is bad per se, but we should work on diminishing this interests. Our overall objective should be that more and more national stakeholders, domestic stakeholders, become supporters and start seeing their perspective in the EU. Only under these preconditions, this ship would not be disbalanced. One of the arguments of the skepticists for all the years had been that the European aspirations are not sustainable, that oligarchs still exist, that businesses still were developed abroad. And now this general picture has changed, but this situation emerged from unprecedented conditions. That is why I keep saying that this interest of the majority of Ukrainians to become part of the European Union should be based on the deep understanding what does it mean for them, not just on geopolitical situation. As for our partners in the EU, now we start speaking about Ukraine as a part of Europe, not as Ukraine and Europe, but Ukraine as a part of Europe. And in this respect, we should more actively work with our European counterparties on the Ukraine's image, Ukraine's perception as a part of Europe. And in this respect, that massive outflow of Ukrainians to the EU, from Ukraine to the EU, and it was not just a flow of the most floating layers of society, but this was like a mixture of the society as it is, more or less poor, more or less educated. It was like a cross-section of Ukrainian society. It was like a not forced meeting between Ukrainian society and European society. Of course, we would like this not to happen like this, under these circumstances. And nevertheless, in these conditions, it is a good chance to build up horizontal relations between society, which on the one hand will assist Ukraine in building up relations, and at the same time would not depopulate Ukraine and deprive it from its best resources, best human resources. Or whether people will decide for the sake of immigration. This will be the next problem after the war, although now Ukraine remains in the situation of war, but the second problem, the depopulation of Ukraine and the loss of the most proactive population, this is the second side of this first problem. And just one example. When we speak with our partners about assistance to the refugees, to the displaced people, unlike in first months, we say that they should not create privileged conditions for Ukrainians, encouraging them to stay. First of all, this may result in the conflict with local people who may see that Ukrainians have some privileges. And on the other hand, when people are seen as victims and are granted a lot of privileges, but if they will be given privileged conditions of employment, then we will lose a lot of population, much more than 10%, which we have lost as of now. So there should be assistance to those who remain in Ukraine, who stay in Ukraine despite the lost housing, lost accommodation, lost jobs, etc. This will be even bigger contribution to Ukraine's European integration. These were just several dimensions which immediately come into my mind when I am thinking about this membership status. Ukraine now is not seen as the third type of country. This is not just the change in terminology. This is the change in attitudes. And I hope also that more and more people, more and more highly qualified people will get involved into this process which are starting now. Not just ceremonial visits to and fro, but real cooperation would require real work of highly qualified people, and in result of that, we will gain new level of quality. Thank you, dear friends. Before giving the possibility for final remarks, so I would like to open Q&A session. My first question is to Taras Kachka. How do you think who should become the driver, further driver of the move forward, because civil society would not move forward the decision making. The second question to Ms. Ivanna, whether we plan to have any mechanisms, any tools which will demonstrate to society that we are reaching some progress, that any benchmarks, related to time. And to Mr. Sushko, what is the work of Renaissance Foundation in support of exchanges, artistic, intellectual, etc.? This is the specificity of what's going on now, that before simple political decisions, simple political formula is impossible. Actually, we need the whole system of legislative initiatives. This is actually a process of discussions, of continuous dialogue. It won't be just one project for which one person could be responsible. Of course, political leadership is important to push the project. And currently we see bright leadership of the president of Ukraine, but the project as a whole requires involvement of all parliamentary committees. The role of civil society as of now even is big, and these are experts. The list of conditions or requirements which are prepared, which is written by the European Commission, requires involvement of civil society as advocates, as checkers. For me, it is obvious that there is a public request for joint mobilization, not just a public leadership process, although there will be some specifically appointed group which will lead the negotiations. Our task for the next few years will be huge, and we will be unable to appoint one responsible person. In our discussions with the government, we came to a conclusion that on the one hand, we need to have a societal perspective, and there is a system to trace back and to follow up what's going. And if we're seriously thinking about implementation of the requirements, we need to develop very detailed, understandable, transparent, and clear monitoring mechanism. This could be a combined planning and monitoring mechanism. As far as I understood, after my discussions with governmental officials, I understood that they are thinking about improvement of the existent mechanism, which is called the pulse of association agreement. And I believe that we shall work keeping in mind not only that 7 preconditions which were described in the opinion, but on the broader considerations and the mechanism which I'm meaning now, it should be based on these broader considerations. And you are quite right, this planning and monitoring mechanism, it should exist. As for the time perspective, I'm very proud that that when we had been working on the visa-free regime, I was the only one person who never tried to suggest some dates or deadlines. Why? Because here much depends on a huge number of components. And first of all, this is the victory in this war. The second is the level of our proficiency, the availability of highly qualified personnel, then our capacity to preserve the dynamics and the impulse for moving forward, our ability to build up the internal dialogue with sufficient respect, with sufficient level of culture, communicative culture, and our ability to listen and to hear our opponents. And all those aspects will depend on our domestic situation. And much things will depend on the external situation. And here we have to be open that many European countries will try to use the negotiation, the future negotiations, for their own interests and in their own interests in order to gain some privileges, in order to prevail in some aspects. And this would require huge hour work for the huge hour work with the European audience, not only with the capitals but of the states, but with many stakeholders abroad. And only when all that will come to its logic conclusion, then we will be able to say that we are successful. And now I would like to say that with the same insistence, with the same resolution, with the same energy as we gained our candidate status, we should now start should start to work on our integration to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Here we have to do much work and to prepare future decisions which will guarantee our security in future. I will add to the question about deadlines. Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the Eurocommission, recollected the year 1999 when the candidate status was awarded to a group of countries. And it was a country like Slovak, to which this process took only 5 years. In the same group, there was Turkey, and now the Turkey remains in the same candidate status for 32 years already, and this demonstrates how much the country may benefit and to which extent the country can benefit from this status. As for the work of the Renaissance Foundation, of course, even earlier we developed much the civil cooperation between Ukraine with the EU countries. We have 1 out of 6 our programs which will benefit from the candidate status. Many our partnership organizations contributed much to the yesterday's decision of the European Council. That vacationary visits, work with civil society to change the attitude to envision as to Ukraine, our cooperation with think tanks, etc. This work will continue. There is a need to support a high level of communication between Ukraine and European countries. And there are some spheres like cooperation with think tanks. It is important for us to produce more competent analytics here in Ukraine and to publish this deep expert opinions in the foreign countries. And in the past, we experienced such demand for our analytical products in Europe. And I believe that in the future, this role of our experts will not be lesser. When the Eurocommission will come to review of the situation in Ukraine, they will pay attention at the analytical products of the independent experts here in Ukraine. And when they see quality products, trustworthy products, they use these opinions. I saw how European institutions even used copy-paste from our publications to support their vision. Taras mentioned that even formation of the European expectations was based on what the civil society organizations from Ukraine suggested. This once again shows the role of the Renaissance Foundation. Independent think tanks, they usually do not have governmental support, governmental funding. That's why we will support them. As of now, we do not have travel grants anymore. And instead of that, we are seeing travel grants not as just trips to universities, but as a part of strategic cooperation between both sides. For example, we provided assistance to local self-governments, to universities, to civil society organizations. Now we are thinking how to strengthen this work, maybe to extend this opportunity on so-called cultural diplomacy. I do not think that we will support like guest tours of artists or actors, but we may think about supporting exchange between cultural figures who allow Europeans to know more about Ukraine at the level of contents and senses. That is my message, is that maybe we will come back next year to the support of cultural diplomacy. Any further questions? Thank you for this opportunity. I'm Doroshenko. I'm representative of the Roma in Ukraine. 20% of Ukrainian territory is occupied. Ukraine won't be able economically to reach its level of the 1991, and the economy will fall further. And in order to survive, we have to contribute much effort. People are very angry. People are very angry in the occupied territories. What about creating the government of the national unity and trust in order to extend the social base of the active power in Ukraine? The mono-majority is not a mono-majority anymore in Ukraine, and if Russia would carry out general mobilization and bring 3 million people to the army, whether we will need to respond to this situation with broader social support of the current government. Thank you. I would come back to the fact that during this 4 months of war, we all become lesser politicians, but more soldiers of Ukrainian society, working jointly to support the Ukrainian rear and gaining support of Ukraine in the world. For me, this was the diplomatic front line. I was focused on the work on provision candidate status, also creating possibilities to punish Russia and to provide international assistance to Ukraine. As for the government of national unity, as of now, I do not see, at this very moment, I do not see a request from the majority majority of society to extend further the support to politicians in power. This is what we observe. This is a broad support, and the society has consolidated in support of this current government in the extreme situation which we have, and I believe in future we'll be able to come back to political discourse, political dialogue. We'll be able to ask the questions which have been accumulated. We'll be able to learn lessons from the mistakes and failures that were made and resulted in problems in course of war. But all the questions will be asked by opposing politicians in future. If Ukrainian society is ready to ask all those questions, it has to signal about that. As for the readiness of different political actors, different political forces to the possibility to form the government of unity, then perhaps some political forces have this possibility, but it seems to me that this will be done in the following way. The priority for us is to preserve the country, to preserve the sovereignty of the country, and to hope that this will be evaluated and heard in the by the people in power. If there are no further questions, then we will wrap up, and we encourage you to